Hello everyone, this is Atma Nityananda and he's Advaita Atma Yoga Academy. Today I'm happy to announce my first book in English, which is entitled, the title is Liberation with the Power of Mantra. You can see here the book. Liberation with the Power of Mantra, and subtitle Self-Awareness, Mantra and Dissolution of the Ego. Self-Awareness, Mantra and Dissolution of the Ego. I want today to present the contents, the topics that I present in my book. First of all, I begin with some prayers and gratitude. Gratitude to all my teachers, knowledge I have that have helped me to attain a very deep transformation of my mind and heart, and also to awaken to the divine essence, what we call true self, consciousness. I'm really grateful for all those teachers and teachings, everything that helped me in this inner journey to be here. So gratitude, then prayers for world peace. Although we live in a world of conflicts and violence, we have now this war in Ukraine, and there are also mini wars in other places as well. Prayers always create sattvic luminous vibrations that help us to elevate our state of consciousness and have our mind and heart in a sattvic, that means in a calm, clear, peaceful state. And also these vibrations can help others also to their inner process. Unity, the book has 3 unities. I prefer to use the word unity than part 1, part 2, or chapter 1, unity, so that to connect with the unity that we are a humanity. Union with consciousness, union with ourselves, with divine consciousness, unity between all beings. So chapter 1, in the unit 1. In the unit 1, I explain what is our true self, what is the ego, and the ways that the ego functions and condition our mind and heart, and the difference, what is the difference between the ego, the egoic self, if you like, what is the difference between the egoic self and the true self, consciousness. In my experience, it is necessary to have this knowledge. It is necessary to have this knowledge so that we can recognize, acknowledge, and be aware more easily and of what happens in our psyche, how the ego works in us. Because the ego, the egoic self, is very tricky, and especially the lower ego is very tricky. Doesn't allow us to see clearly how it works, because clouds our mind and intellect, so we have no so clear perception. And also, because of lack of knowledge, we cannot recognize what happens in us that is only an expression of the ego. That's why discernment, it is one of the greatest, the highest to me, capability, ability of mind, of intellect, that help us to realize what is true and what is false, what is right, what is wrong. To discern most of all between, we become capable through this capacity discernment or discrimination, to discern between the egoic self and the real self. This is the, of course, love, compassion, concentration are only important, but without discernment, we cannot walk in this inner path. We are blind. We need clear perception and discernment to realize, to understand and realize what really happens in our mind and heart and get free from all conditioning. Discernment is a capacity that helps us to realize that although we see this, but to realize that all these sensory experiences we live daily, moment to moment, all events of life are transitory, fleeting events, and also to realize that in themselves do not have happiness in themselves. To realize this, we need clear perception and discernment, this ability which we call discernment, discrimination. Otherwise, we take the impermanent as permanent. We take that things of life can fulfill us. We think, we believe that things of life, the objects, sensory objects, and the experiences, sensory experience can fulfill us and make us happy. This is a delusion. And only this capacity of discernment can help us realize this delusion or illusion. There is no other way. And in my experience, it is that we need to have knowledge, although ultimately our soul or divine essence is the teacher, the inner teacher that guides us. However, in my experience always, we need an external teacher or teaching and knowledge. And without this knowledge, we are blind. It's very difficult to perceive and understand what really happens in our psyche. Of course, ultimately, it is us that we have to practice and put all this knowledge in practice and acquire our knowledge from direct experience. However, all this knowledge from teachers and advanced practitioners will help us much, at least this is my experience, to make this path more, to progress in this path more easily, although it's not easy at all. Of course, depends on our maturity, the maturity of each one, how we have worked in past lives, how we live in this life. So it depends. It's not something the same for all aspirants, practitioners, and devotees of truth and freedom. So for each one is something very unique. In reality, for everyone, there are so much paths as the aspirants are. The path for everyone is unique, and each one of us have to find their own way to realize the truth and get free from all egoic tendencies and conditioning of the mind and heart, which is in reality all this conditioning is expressions and branches of what we call egoic self, or simply just ego. So, from the first topic of Unity 1, our true nature is happiness. I explained in this topic that happiness is what we are, what we really are. Happiness, in reality, bliss, is Ananda. Ananda in Sanskrit. Bliss is our true nature. It's the nature of our divine self. It's not a characteristic, happiness. And this bliss, at the level of mind, and when I say mind, I don't mean only thinking or thoughts. I mean the whole inner world, psychological world. We experience this happiness, this bliss, as happiness of sattva. Sattva is the quality of nature that enable us to experience happiness. When our mind vibrates in sattva, we experience happiness. Happiness, sattva is also peace, harmony, love. It is the vehicle through which our divine essence can express itself in us and in this world. So I begin with this topic so that to pay attention to this, to clarify that happiness is our true nature, bliss, happiness is our true nature, and the sattva in us. And there is no happiness outside us. This is important. To steadily and sincerely and with determination, patience, and perseverance to practice in order to get liberation, we need to understand some important things like this, that happiness, we cannot find happiness in the external world, because our main problem is that we are attached to the sensory experiences, and behind them there is this strong belief, unconscious belief that happiness, we can find happiness in the pleasures, in success, in fame, money, commodities, possessions. This is the basis of course, ignorance as well, ignorance, and this belief is part of the ignorance. To believe that we can be happy because we will have this or that, we can experience this pleasure or that pleasure or anything in our life. So I make very clear from the very beginning of the book that happiness lies within us, not in the external world. And I will read this quote of Sri Ramana Maharshi. Sri Ramana Maharshi, a great enlightened being from India, Tiruvannamalai, said, "What happiness can you get from things extraneous to yourself? And when you get it, how long will it last? Perfect peace is of the self-consciousness. Peace is your natural state." Peace is, in this quote appears like that you can find also happiness in the external world, because Ramana Maharshi says, when you get it, happiness, how long will it last? Will it last? Of course, we may experience happiness when a desire is fulfilled, But happiness has nothing to do with the fulfillment of desire. It has to do with the state of our mind, because the moment a desire is fulfilled, then our mind becomes calm, and assumes its sattvic state and becomes unconsciously, because we are not conscious of, we are not conscious of this contact with our divine essence. When our mind assumes its sattvic state, then the light of consciousness we are, which is Ananda, bliss, reflects somehow more clearly in the mind. That's why we experience happiness. We experience the happiness of sattva, and to some degree the happiness or bliss of the self, of divine essence. Bhagavad Gita says the contacts of the senses with the objects cause heat and cold, pleasure and pain, have a beginning and an end. They are impermanent. Endure them bravely, O Arjuna, says Krishna to Arjuna. We must become very conscious, very aware of the impermanence of all experience, sensory experience. Again and again we have to reflect into it, to reflect and realize that we cannot find permanent happiness in impermanent experiences, although we know that, but we have to realize it profoundly to understand it and realize. The realization is the deepest possible way to understand things, I could say, and stop, cease to do things that are false. Because the moment we realize that happiness deeply, that happiness does not exist in the sensory pleasures and success, worldly success, then we stop seeking happiness into them. But an intellectual understanding is not enough. A deep realization that external things cannot make us happy is what we need to stop seeking happiness fulfillment in the external world. And then there is the subject of our true self. We must have a clear knowledge what is our true self, so that, and then to have a knowledge about our egoic self. And this will help us to discern and to recognize our true nature, and some time to realize our true nature. Realize means that not only recognize the space, the inner space of silence within us, but to realize that we are this silence. It's a different thing. One thing is to recognize this ever-present silent space of consciousness or awareness within us. It's very easy. This is not difficult at all. Doesn't need any special capacity. But to perceive clearly what this silence is, to become aware of fully of this silence, and moreover, to realize that we are this silence, is a different thing. So we need knowledge to know mentally, intellectually first, what this true self is, and then through self-observation and self-inquiry to recognize this silent space of consciousness within us, and through the practice of meditation and self-inquiry, and by deepening in this silence, we facilitate awakening to happen. What means awakening? The realization that we are this silent space of consciousness. this silent presence, and not the body, mind, me entity we thought we are until now, until that moment of awakening. This is awakening. A recognition of the inner silence is only a recognition, which is also muy important. We have to walk this inner journey step by step, and we pass through various stages. This is inevitable. How long will take this journey? It's different for each one, depending on the maturity of the work we have done in the previous lives, incarnations, and how we have lived in the last incarnation. So for each one is something different. For some can be more easy, for others impossible. For others with a lot of effort or medium effort. There is no, it's different for each one. So don't compare yourselves with others. It's meaningless to compare ourselves with others. What others do, how fast how quick is their progress. It's meaningless. The point is to find happiness within us. And this is not comparable. Because the self in us and the self in others is one and the same consciousness. What we call true self is the universal or cosmic consciousness or absolute consciousness, in the sense that this consciousness is eternal, infinite, never changes, never dies, it's timeless, formless. So that's why it's absolute. And nothing can destroy or kill or affect in any way this consciousness. And this consciousness is the most profound part, we could say, of our existence. Because as human beings, we are multidimensional beings. So after the second topic is about who we really are. What is our true self? And I can read how I begin this topic. Our true self, what we really are, is the non-dual, that is one without a second, consciousness, which is identical with the universal or absolute consciousness, the highest principle of the universe, what we call Brahman, God, Allah, Tao, etc. Universal or absolute consciousness, that is Brahman or God, manifests in us as the seemingly individual consciousness we call Atman or self, and which we mistakenly identify with our body and mind. So in this first paragraph, I explain what consciousness is, that our true self and which is consciousness and the universal consciousness is one and the same consciousness, and due to ignorance we identify this consciousness with the body, because this sense I exist belongs to consciousness, because the only thing that really exists is consciousness. And this consciousness expresses itself as this body, mind, me entity and all universe. And because of ignorance and lack of discernment, we identify ourselves, this sense I exist in this space of consciousness, which is the only thing I exist, with the body. And so we perceive that we exist as a body, mind, me entity. That is, I continue, that is, we feel and believe that the body is ourself, that consciousness belongs to us, and not only we identify ourselves with the body and the mind, but we think and believe, we feel and believe that consciousness belongs to us, and that is a personal consciousness that is different from the universal consciousness and the consciousness of other beings. So there is my consciousness and your consciousness. This is a great delusion. There is no my and yours, mine and yours. Consciousness is one and expresses itself through all beings. As the one sun can enter the homes of all inhabitants on the planet Earth, it is the one sunlight, one sun enters in our home. Or there is the one sun that reflects on the lakes all over the world. So we may see many reflections, but the sun is one. So we may perceive different consciousness, that my consciousness, your consciousness, their consciousness, but there is only one consciousness, which is a reflection. And this consciousness in us is a reflection, we could say, of the universal consciousness. So we must have this clear knowledge about consciousness. And this, it is stated in Upanishads, where one of the greatest sacred texts of humanity are Upanishads. And there are 4 great sayings, or Mahavakyas in Sanskrit. Aham, Ayam Atma Brahma. Aham Brahmasmi. Ayam Atma Brahma means that Atman is Brahman. Atman is the individual consciousness and Brahman is the universal or absolute consciousness. So Ayam Atma Brahma means this individual consciousness is what I am, and this individual consciousness is one identical with the universal consciousness. So I clarify what really this consciousness or true self is in the second topic. Then I explain the ego, and I have a topic about the ego and the self. So I compare what is the ego, what is the self. So in the second topic, what is the self, the true self. In the third topic, I make a discrimination between the ego and the self. And then in the 3 next 3 topics, I explain very in detail what this ego is and how it functions in us and how it deludes us, so that we have this knowledge will help us, will help you to observe these expressions of the ego, to stop identifying with them and dissolve them. And by through the dissolution of the egoic tendencies, we attain liberation. There is no other, how can I could say this? The liberation is not something different than the dissolution, the complete total dissolution of the ego. Because when the ego is dissolved, our mind is empty, transparent, diaphanous, like the clear space. And in this space, clear space, our divine essence reflects clearly. So we can experience clearly, profoundly, the peace, bliss, plenitude, freedom of our divine essence. And because the ego has been dissolved totally, there is nothing in us to distract our mind attention from this bliss, and there is nothing in us to make us suffer, because suffering is only an expression of the egoic self. Suffering, psychological pain and suffering is only an expression of the ego in the form of fear, agitation, anger, hatred, envy, guilt, insecurity, and also what we call positive emotions are problematic. It's, in my experience, some kind of suffering, because the moment we experience, for example, like this emotion of liking something, although it appears something positive, it is not the bliss and the peace and the plenitude of our divine nature. It's a lower vibration. The moment this like disappears, subsides, we can experience this peace and bliss. So in reality, liberation is to go beyond even the so-called positive emotions. And love is not an emotion. I don't speak about love. Happiness also is not an emotion, in my experience. It is more of the causal sheath, causal body, or Anandamaya vehicle, which is not an emotional state. It is, to me at least, it's difficult to explain what this vibration of happiness is when this Anandamaya kosha, Anandamaya seed vibrates and we experience happiness. I cannot put it in words. But to me, real happiness is not an emotion. There is also this happiness of rajas mixed with sattva, which is also an emotional state. I explain very clear how the ego deludes us. How the ego deludes us, because it's very important. Because the ego is very tricky. And so it makes us, it creates us illusions. And we think that the ego is this or that, or this is not the ego, but it is the ego. A teacher said that ego can take also appear as a sage, express itself. The ego can express itself in us as a sage, as a saint, as a holy person. This is the what we call spiritual ego somehow. But spiritual ego is quite something quite different. The ego can assume the role of the sage, which it's quite different. So we must know all these tricks of the ego, so that to perceive them in us clearly and dissolve them by the power of mantra and prayer. Because in this book, what I explain is the dissolution of the ego through the power of mantra and the power of prayer. These two go together, in my experience, always. And with these two weapons, divine weapons, I have managed until now to dissolve most of the egoic energies, tendencies in my from my psyche, in my psyche. So after that, desire and freedom. I explain what is desire, because desire in reality, in all great texts like Bhagavad Gita, Vivekachudamani, what great sages like Sivananda said, is that dissolution of desire leads to freedom. But they say also, dissolution of the ego leads to the liberation, to the freedom. How can be this? Because in reality, desire is the essential nature of ego. It's not two different psychological elements. So I explain this in my book, that desire and ego are one element, is ego, and ego is essentially desiring. And so dissolution of desire and ego go together, and their dissolution means freedom and liberation. In the second unity, I speak about self-awareness, how to develop self-awareness, and about self-observation. Why? Because this inner work is about self-awareness and liberation of the psychological tendencies. But to know what these tendencies are, we need to observe ourselves moment to moment, each moment, every moment. Otherwise, we will be identified with these tendencies, and we will express ourselves through this tendency. And we, deluded by this identification with the tendency, we believe that it is our decision, our conscious decision and action. In reality, we are victims of this tendency. The moment we identify with the tendency of the egoic self, we are one with it, we are it. So, in order to stop identifying ourselves with these tendencies of any kind, impulses, emotions, desires, pride, lust, greed, etc., we must connect with the inner silence. And inner silence is what we really are, and is unaffected and untouchable, unattached from what happens in our psyche, and of course of what happens in the external world. So, in order to stop identification with all tendencies, mental, emotional expressions, we must get in touch with this inner silence and take a distance from these psychological expressions. There is no other way. That's why developing of self-awareness is the center of practice, of spiritual practice and self-realization and liberation. First, what is self-awareness? We have to understand what self-awareness is. So and it's related with our true nature, as I said. However, self-awareness in the modern language and psychology is used to refer to the awareness of our psychological reactions and expressions, tendencies, programming. Okay, we can use this term or word self-awareness for both, but in my book I use mostly or always self-awareness in relation to the conscious contact and abundance or dueling in the inner silence. So I'm self-aware means I am aware of this inner silence and the sense I am or I exist. And from this from this state of self-awareness, I can observe without being caught in what the ego projects in my mind. I can take this attitude we call witness, the witnessing attitude. And we can, from this state, to observe everything that arises in us, and the more we develop this capacity to steadily and deeply rest in the inner silence, the more we are capable to avoid identification with thoughts and emotions, and the more we become capable to notice them the very moment they arise in us. And the earlier we become aware of this manifestation, expression of the egoic tendencies, the easier it becomes to manage them, to avoid identification, and also to avoid being seduced by the emotions, desires, and passions and cravings, and emotions as well. And the easier will be for us to let them go and make them subside and diminish part of their energy through the power of mantra and prayer. I do both. Every time a tendency arises in me, and because I am already in touch with the silence, I can notice this tendency from the very beginning, its movement, It's in the beginning, it's an energetic movement that comes from the place of the chest, of the heart. Somehow, I don't know where exactly begins this movement, but from here, then it comes up, and then immediately appear the thoughts, because this tendency, it is energetic, associated with some thoughts or a way of thinking. The more we are capable, the more we have developed the capacity of self-awareness, that means to get in touch, deep touch with the inner silence, the easier it becomes to notice this manifestation in the very beginning. And thus, we are in a position to avoid identification and be seduced by this energy, and the easier it becomes to make it, to let it go and make it subside and diminish part of the of its energy using the power of mantra and prayer. And of course, this, how we do this, I explain this, all this process in the Unity 3. So, but first in the Unity 2, you have to have a very clear understanding and knowledge what is self-awareness, how to develop self-awareness. Third topic, activities. More the main practices to develop self-awareness is meditation, self-inquiry, and japanama, repetition of mantra. There are also other methods, but I use them most of all. And some teachers say, but self-awareness is not a practice. It's just being aware of your inner self or true self. That is the inner space of silence. Yes, it's true. But because of the tendencies, our mind is distracted very easily from this awareness of the inner silence. That's why we have, not we must, we have in the sense that if we want to live consciously moment to moment, to use some method like the repetition of mantra so that to maintain this conscious contact with self-awareness. And what does it mean, develop self-awareness? To remain more steadily, more deeply and clearly in conscious contact with this silence and the peace also, and the peace and freedom of the silence. This is developed, that means developing. Because our mind, our ego in reality, uses our mind at all levels to distract our attention and use the attention in order to experience the sense objects and pleasures. That's why we are always in a effort to withdraw back our mind, to withdraw our mind and attention from the objects and direct it again and again in the inner silence. This needs effort. The moment our mind becomes calm and tranquil and still, self-awareness is a state. It's not a practice. It's a natural state. But due to the tendencies, as I said, we cannot maintain this effortless abundance in our essence, in this silent space of consciousness. That's why we need to make a very subtle effort to withdraw our mind always from what attaches itself and redirect our attention, turn our attention again and again in the silence. Because the tendencies distract our attention and mind and attach to the objects and the thoughts and emotions. And we have to be alert to become conscious of this distraction and turn back our attention to the inner silence. That's why effort is needed. It's necessary. And what means developing of self-awareness? To maintain this deep connection steadily. That means that the distraction will become less and less. And tells us that this connection will be more and more deeper and deeper. And that means that I will experience more and more peace. It's not only a matter of being connected with the silence. The point is, the goal is to experience freedom and peace, not only the silence. When we are superficially aware of the silence, okay, we experience this silence, changeless, still silence, but in order to experience the peace and plenitude and beauty, we must go deeper. And this is what I call developing of self-awareness. And in relation, self-awareness in relation to the awareness of our psychological movements and expressions, it means that developing of self-awareness means that we become more and more capable to become aware of what is happening in us, what causes this expression, and what will be the result. What are the triggers that manifest these tendencies in us? Okay, in some occasions, in some tendencies, it's very easy. For example, sexual lust, if we see a woman or a man or a photo, this can trigger the sexual lust to manifest in ourselves and then begin this lust, tendency of lust to create thoughts and imagination lustful, so that to make us identify and fulfill it. But due to identification, we think that we want sexual pleasure. It is in reality lust in us. This is the reality. So we have to clarify what is self-awareness, how to develop self-awareness, to develop the capacity to self-observation, to observe without judging and criticizing and reacting in reality to the psychological tendencies. For example, anger arises in me and I become angry because anger arises in me again and again. This is a reaction to reaction. So we must observe these tendencies like anger or lust or whatever without being identified with this and without judging from the point of view of the ego, to judging them, to criticize them negatively. This is also ego. The ego have come from a back door. So we identify twice, with the first reaction and the second reaction. So we must become capable little by little to observe without being resisting and reacting to the egoic tendency that have been expressed in us. And we must develop this capacity of self-observation. That means to become capable to observe everything that happens in us, fully conscious of what is happening in us. Because without this, we cannot liberate our mind and heart from these tendencies. And as we usually said in the Gnostic movement, I was for 10 years, we said that we have to work with the details of the tendencies, not only with the strong expressions of anger, strong expressions of lust, of fear. We have to work moment to moment with the little expressions, the subtle expressions, we call them details of the ego, and dissolve them with the power of prayer and mantra and other means. And the third unity is dedicated to the mantra and also to the karma yoga, which is a way of living moment to moment, so that to diminish this power of ego in us. So I explain how we can work with the repetition of mantra, which can be a name of God or another mantra. Normally all mantras are related to God, but some are mantras are phrases. words. For example, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. Shiva is a name of God in the Hinduism tradition, Hindu tradition. So, Om Namah Shivaya. But there are other mantras that can use, for example, the Gayatri mantra, Om Bhurбhuva Svaha Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Nat Prachodayat, doesn't use any name of gods. Another mantra of God's name is Narayana. Om Namo Narayanaya. Narayana, also in the Hinduism, it is one of the names of God according to the Hinduism tradition. So there are mantras that, or Om. Om is not a special name of God, but it is a representation of the God, of God. Om. And it is called Bija mantra, a seed mantra. Like also Krim, Hrim. There is a great variety of mantras. I use the mantra Om Namah Shivaya because my beloved teacher and being Harakam Babaji gave us this instruction to repeat Om Namah Shivaya, although he said that we can use any mantra or any name of God we feel in our heart. And because I am devotee of the Divine Shakti or Divine Mother, I repeat also mantras of Divine Mother, like Om Sri Durgaya Namaha, Om Sri Durgaya Namaha. Another mantra is Om Aim Hrim Klin Chamudaya Vise. Another mantra is, I like to repeat this, Om Krim Hrim Srim Durgaya Namaha, Om Krim Hrim. This is Bija mantras, seed mantras. Krim Hrim Srim Durgaya Namaha. And also I combine Om Namah Shivaya with Bija mantras. Om Hring Namah Shivaya. Instead of saying Om Namah Shivaya, Om Hring Namah Shivaya, Om Hring Namah Shivaya, Om Hring Namah Shivaya, Om Hring Namah Shivaya. So I explained the mantras, how to use the mantra for Japanama, for repetition, mental repetition, chanting also of mantra, and how we can use the mantra for the dissolution of the egoic tendencies. I speak, as I said, I present, as I said, about also Karma Yoga, which is combined with repetition of the mantra. Karma Yoga means that we do everything, all our actions are dedicated to God, and we are not attached to the action itself and the outcome of the action. We have no desires, expectations. We offer all these actions to God or to life, whatever we feel, but not to our ego. Because normally our actions are egocentric. We do everything for our ego. I want to satisfy this, to get this pleasure, to have succeed in this. And all this, in this attitude, we nourish, we feed our ego. So by offering everything to life and God, we don't do these actions for ourselves, but for God. So the ego cannot take advantage of this action and feel inflated. I did it, and we feel ourselves to be only an instrument, that everything are done by the God's will and power. We are only instruments. The point is, I'm very strong. Yes, you are very strong because God gave you this power. It's not your power. And this Shakti, vital energy that functions in us, is God's power. And we have to recognize this, to be conscious of this. And one of the ways to get rid of I am powerful, it's Karma Yoga, to offer everything to God and take ourselves only to be an instrument of God will and God power. Self-observation and dissolution of the ego. I explain here how the the self-observation is related to the dissolution. As I explained before, without becoming aware of what is happening, and without understanding, without realizing that this is an egoic tendency, we cannot dissolve the ego. To notice, to become aware of a tendency, we must observe ourselves moment to moment, always, constantly. So the moment that an egoic tendency arises in us, we notice this tendency, we avoid, or if it is powerful, this expression, we try to avoid identification, and if it's needed to use some method to stop the attraction to stop identifying with this tendency, and use the power of mantra and prayer to dissolve this tendency. Developing acceptance. Acceptance is one of the main qualities or abilities to dissolve the egoic tendencies. Because if we live in the mode of resistance mode, it is difficult to dissolve because this resistance mode comes from the ego again. So we still identify ourselves with the ego. And when we resist everything that happens in the world, in our lives, then the ego has the appropriate inner environment to express itself. And of course, this resistance comes from the ego. Resisting what happens is from the ego. And so acceptance has to do with to accept external circumstances, happenings, and also accept ourselves as, in reality, accept the weaknesses, tendencies, flaws that exist in our psyche, and do not react towards them, so that this will help us to get in touch more with the silence and distance ourselves from these tendencies and relax. And this relaxation and acceptance and connection with the silence makes more easy to let go of them, and then to dissolve them with the power of prayer and mantra. Topic 6 of the Unity 3, the dissolution of the ego through prayer and mantra. I explain how we can use the prayer and the mantra, and I present some a way to pray to the Divine Mother, or to divinity, to God. How we can use this great power. Prayer is a very great power because we connect with the inner silence, and we have faith and trust this power, higher power in us, that can work in us and liberate us from the egoic tendencies. And we can facilitate this with a prayer. Oh, Divine Mother, please. The moment anger, for example, arises in us, we become aware of it. We connect as deeply as we can with the inner silence, so that avoid identification and creating distance from this anger energy. And while being deeply connected with the silence, we feel also this anger energy, and we say the prayer. Oh, Divine Shakti, or Divine Mother, please dissolve this anger energy and free my mind and heart from anger energy. Or we can say, oh, Divine Shakti, fill me with peace, with light, love, and healing energy, and dissolve this anger energy in my mind and heart. This is a way to make the prayer for dissolution of the egoic tendencies. And then we can use the mantra, or we can first use the mantra and then the prayer. We can mix them. We say sometimes the prayer, sometimes the mantra, until this energy will be dissolved, or partly. Part of this energy will be dissolved, and the egoic tendency will subside. Of course, there are moments that then the egoic tendency doesn't subside, wants to express itself. In these cases, we use some method And that means that we still identify somehow. Although we are not fully identified with the tendency, there is an identification. That's why this tendency continues to express itself in us. Because the moment we are totally disidentified, the tendency cannot function in us, will subside by itself. But to reach this state of total disidentification, we need to use some method. Otherwise, it's quite difficult. Of course, this is not something very fixed, but it's something we have to find ourselves according to our experiences, capacities, etc. Then I express a topic about inquiry into tendency and its dissolution. With the tendencies, we work moment to moment, the very moment they express themselves in us, we work with them, we dissolve them with the prayer and the mantra, but we have to work with them at home or our place, or wherever we are, to make a more profound inquiry, investigation, what these tendencies are, how they work, and to use some special inquiries to disidentify, to stop identifying ourselves with them. And finally use a greater and larger specific prayer to dissolve this tendency we have investigated profoundly. And then we can use also in this practice, we can use also a modern practice called EFT, or known as tapping, through which we can diminish the egoic energy from our psyche. And also we can use affirmations and visualizations. So in the first part of Unity 3, I give the practices of mantra, repetition, karma yoga, how we can make turn every action in spiritual practice. And then I speak about self-observation and dissolution of the ego, because without self-observation, dissolution of the ego is not possible. Developing acceptance, because acceptance is a very important ability to develop in order to dissolve the egoic tendencies. And then I explain in two topics how to dissolve the egoic tendencies moment to moment through the power of mantra and prayer, and then how to investigate and get a profound understanding and realization about awareness about the tendencies and dissolve them through a larger prayer, EFT visualization, and repetition of affirmations. Then I present a topic about dissolution of the ego and desires and liberation. Because, as I said in the beginning, liberation is not something different than the complete dissolution of the ego or egoic tendencies and desires. Desires in reality, or desiring, is the essential nature of ego. And so I make clear about this, what liberation is, how we get liberation by dissolving these egoic tendencies, ego and desires. And then I dedicate 3 topics importance to me. One is the nights of spiritual practice. It is that we don't go in this inner journey, we don't advance constantly in a linear way. We have upside downs. There are moments or periods of time that we feel very enthusiastic, very positive. We have experiences, we practice with steadiness, steadfastness. We have experiences, and it seems that all the way we will be in this state. But suddenly comes a night of spiritual practice. That means we have not so much, we are bored, or is something we can lose our orientation. We have doubts about ourselves, if at the end we can succeed in this endeavor and attain liberation. There is a resistance. This night of spiritual practice can take various forms. And it is that in this night of spiritual practice that many aspirants abandon spirituality and the spiritual path. I have seen this many times in my life. It's so easy to, I could say it's more natural to abandon spiritual life and practice than to continue. And I mean to continue practicing with favor, with sincerity, diligently, systematically, to dedicate and devote our lives to spiritual practice and life, not to be a spiritual practice to be a hobby. So it's easier to abandon after some time because we learn new things at the beginning, new environments, new persons, mysterious, everything happens in our mind. And we think that spiritual life is like this, but it's not like this. This is only a part, a very small part of spiritual journey. It's not like this. And also, when we may start practicing with devotion and we dedicate our life, we pass through these nights and days and nights of spiritual practice. We have to face them. And I explain here how to face these nights of spiritual practice. I give some advices according to my experience. Then I speak about satsang, which is one of the most important means for liberation. How satsang, I explain what is satsang, which in reality is union or meeting with for truth, means that a spiritual teacher or an advanced aspirant does meetings, and in these meetings they speak about the truth, about practices, everything related to truth. And the point is that when this satsang is in the presence of an enlightened being or awakened being, this the energy of this being radiates and transforms the participants, because they feel this energy enter in their psyche and the energy field, and this energy, especially if this is a very great spiritual being like Harakam Babaji, like Krishna, like Jesus Christ, like Swami Shivananda, like Ramana Maharshi, like Nisargadatta Maharaj, like Amritanandamayi, Anandamayi. So these beings can help us transform our mind and heart through their power vibration. And finally, I present a topic: stay firm in your practice, because practice is the only way to liberation and realization of our true self. So whatever may happen in your journey, don't be disappointed, don't lose your heart. Stay firm in your practice by any means. Pray to God, ask help, participate in satsangs, do practices in centers and groups to give you this motivation and this warmness to continue in practice. Stay firm in your practice. And if you stay firm in your practice, there is no doubt that you can succeed in this endeavor. Because this endeavor is not only a personal, individual endeavor. It is the whole universe that works through us to realize this highest principle of life we call God. In reality, it is God that wants to be conscious of itself using this body-mind instrument. And this body-mind instrument, for some reason, has lost this orientation. And through the calling of the soul, we are back in this endeavor of this inner spiritual journey to return to our original home consciously. And so it is in that point of realization, full realization and establishment of ourselves in this divine consciousness, it is that the human becomes God and the God becomes human. And the two are one, life. This is, I wanted to share with you about my first book in English, because I have written already 3 books in Greek, and I prepared 2 more books in English. The second one is about living moment to moment consciously and about non-duality. It is more complete, I could say, book. And the other one is about meditation. So if one aspirant has these 3 books, will have this all necessary knowledge to work with himself effectively, to liberate himself from the egoic tendencies, realize its true nature, and get liberation. Of course, knowledge is necessary, as I said, but it is us the most important factor. It is us, it is our motivation, our longing to realize God consciousness, to get free from this samsara, to get free from ignorance and all limitations of mind and ego most of all, and live a life of expansion, unity, love, peace, and plenitude. It depends on us. I wish you peace, love, and light, and realize God consciousness in this very life and become a being of peace, love, and light. Namaste.